Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple minutes to let people sign in, and then we'll get going with today's session. We're just going to give it another couple minutes to let people log in, and then we'll start today's session. All right, folks, we're just going to give it another couple minutes for people to log in, and then we'll start today's session. All right, we seem to have a critical mass. So welcome. My name is Mark Castiglione. I'm the Executive Director of the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. And welcome to the latest installment of CDRPC's Planning and Zoning Workshop Series. Today's session is titled Meaningful Engagement and Why It's Critical to the Public Process. For those of you who do not know CDRPC, we are a regional planning resource center that serves Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation, communicating, collaborating, and facilitating regional initiatives. We work with partners to help them address regional problems. We established this webinar series to help planners sharpen their skills and as a vehicle for planning and zoning board members to obtain required credit hours. Planning and zoning board members are required by state statute to obtain 4 hours of training every year. Town, village, and city zoning board of appeals members and planning board members, as well as county planning board members, must receive the training. Municipalities have a wide latitude in defining what training is acceptable for credit. After each one of these webinars, each attendee who registered with an email address will receive an email confirming their attendance. This email may be submitted to your municipality for consideration of credit. Next, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Hodgson and Russ, whose generous support allows these offerings to be made free of charge. Also, thank you to today's speakers, whose time and effort and knowledge makes this presentation possible. And I know it's going to be a compelling one. In addition, for practicing AICP certified planners, this session has been approved for 1 credit hour of CM credit. So a few housekeeping notes. Attendees will join with audio and video off. This does not mean you're unable to ask questions, so please do so using the Q&A function or the chat box. We anticipate that the presenters will try to answer questions in the flow of the presentation, but the majority of the Q&A will happen after the presentations are completed. This presentation will be archived and made available on CDRPC's website, and a recording of this webinar will be made available on CDRPC's YouTube channel. Be sure to like and follow. There's my social media go viral clip. So this has the potential to go viral. I mean, everyone should like and share. So today's session will focus on the importance of community engagement in the public planning and decision-making process. All too often, public engagement is thought as an afterthought and is only made available to communities when the cake is already baked. But we need to start talking to communities when we're talking about what ingredients are going into the cake. So our presenters today will go through a tried and true methodology for citizen participation and outline how this decision-making process is really impactful to citizen-led organizations and citizen-led initiatives that can really transform communities that start with a robust public process for engagement. So our speakers today, a rather august group of people. First is Liz Podolsky-King. She's a licensed landscape architect and certified planner, and she leads Bergmann's office in Albany. She's passionate about designing spaces and improving the quality of life, and as recently I've heard, also improving the playground at which our daughters play at the elementary school. So congratulations there, Liz, and thank you. Mary Moore Wallinger is a licensed landscape architect with experience in landscape architecture and urban design. She runs her own boutique firm, Land Art Studio, where she collaborates with communities and designers on meaningful placemaking and community building. Oh, she also and she strives to improve Schenectady for all of its residents. Bonita Law Zhao has been with the New York State Department of Health for 32 years in a variety of capacities. She's an environmental justice advocate for more than 40 years, and recently she was appointed by Governor Hochul to be the first African American to serve on the Adirondack Park Agency. She serves on boards of one Albany County and 4 additional Adirondack organizations, advises 4 organizations in the Adirondacks in Albany, and is an outdoor Afro leader for Albany and upstate New York. And finally, but last but not least, is Johan Matthews. He's the principal and founder of Mutual Design, a global co-design company based in Schenectady. For more than 10 years, Johan has been collaborating with local leaders and institutions to facilitate equitable change in emerging communities across the Northeast. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to the team to start the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate everyone who showed up to hear us share a little bit about our experiences as we've engaged the often insane idea that it's important to talk to the people you're creating these designs and initiatives for, right? We're just a group of folks who embarked on this journey, and we believe in talking to the communities we serve. We believe they should be involved throughout the process, beginning, middle, end, inspiration, ideation, implementation. And so just want to appreciate everyone for being with me, and I hope you guys take something from this that transforms the way you do things. So let's keep rocking. So today we're going to cover 4 main sections. Each of us are going to take one of these questions, right? These questions, we start with why engage, right? So why is that important? What does a meaningful engagement look like? How do you engage when you don't have any relationships? And how do you engage when resources are scarce? So each of us are going to take a section, and we're going to, at the end, try to, answer a few more questions that come out of some of our sharings. So why engage, right? It's kind of, the crux of why we're here. It could be messy, right? You see these kids. It involves a lot of hands, right? A lot of people get involved, and it's often unclear what the outcome is, right? What is the piece of art that we're striving to create? But I'd like to ask you guys, what is the cost of not engaging? And how does it affect the destiny of that community? How does it affect the way that community grows up? So the first benefit I'd like to communicate of engagement is the actual act of seeing the community, just seeing the community and how transformative that could be. And more importantly, seeing the community as local experts, as experts of their lived experiences. Because when we see the community as local experts, as people who are very well-versed in the realities of their daily living, it values their lived experiences, right? And it informs how we see ourselves, right? It informs whether we see ourselves as problems or as problem solvers, right? As beneficiaries or benefactors. So it's a reframe that fundamentally transforms the lived experiences of people in their community, right? And it gives you a chance to respond to real needs and opportunities as a designer, a planner, or an institution looking to engage in an initiative. And the bottom line is that people support what they help to create. And you can take that step further. People don't support what they're excluded from. So how do we create opportunities for meaningful engagement, knowing that it drives this value chain of people feeling affirmed, people seeing themselves as problem solvers, not as problems, and having their real needs met. To the right, we see an image of grandfather and a nephew. This is from a project Mary Moore and I did a few years ago. And it's asking what type of improvements would you like to see in this park, right? That was a project, making improvements in this park. But from observing people in that park and talking to people, we reframed that, right? We valued their perspective and recognized people were using the park for chilling out, right? Sitting in the seats, whether you're elder, taking a stroll, or you're a teen trying to hang out with your friends. People were using it for working out, right? Heating up, sweating on the courts or working out in the jungle gym. And they're using it for cooling off. So that reframe helped us look at the problem from the community's eyes, right? And it isn't the case that we just replaced the water fountain, right? Once we think about how people are cooling off, recognize that they're athletes, right? Maybe there's a mist over there. That we've got little kids. Maybe there's mini sprinkles at the walkway, right? It reframes fundamentally the engagement because it's not just making improvements in the park. It is responding to the real needs and lived experiences of people, right? So that's the first benefit to the community. The second is designing for connection. I've noticed, and the fundamental guiding principle for my company, that communities are disconnected by design. They've been facing decades of disinvestment, and that not only has practical ramifications where people feel completely cut off from the resources that are supposed to serve them, governments, institutions, designers, but they feel like there's nothing to say, right? Because no one's listening. And so the first thing I recommend is learning to listen, right? And what does that look like? How do we overcome that barrier? Because it's not just enough to have an event and ask people to show up. If they speak up, can we listen to them? What is our capacity to hear what they have to say? And the fundamental mark of a good listener is not whether you think you understand, it's whether the person feels heard, right? And that's an awkward engagement. A lot of the times we can look in this picture right here and we're thinking, what would you like? And we can get in there and fill in the blanks for them. But can we wait patiently enough to hear what they have to say and to make them feel heard, right? And could that be the basis of a long-term relationship? Because this project is not a one-off, right? It's a long list of interventions within that community as it grows and matures over time, right? So how do you develop and strengthen long-term relationships? And we allow opportunity for shared capacity building when we listen, right? It's not just enough to move the community in a direction that allows them to get engaged in the issues that affect their lives, right? From outreach to engagement to involvement to ownership. But the institutions who are providing these services also need to grow and evolve, right? We need to learn how to listen. We need to learn how to store that information, how to synthesize, how to make sense and apply it to our designs. And so shared capacity building, right? Facilitating this co-evolution institutions and the communities they serve, right? Not just the community needs to get involved or, we need to grow together, right? So how do you design for connection, recognizing that we are disconnected by design? And finally, we're thinking about who will inherit these communities, right? And how are we supporting that community in shaping its destiny, right? Because if we do not create a place for people to make their mark, they will never see themselves in the future of this community. They will not be able to find their place, right? So how do we engage the future leaders to leave their mark and to inherit a community that we're all building together, right? If we create this today and other folks come in to that community, which could happen, right? How are we keeping space for the people who are there right now and for the children who would grow up to inherit these changes? How are we cultivating a pathway to ownership, right? Because that's the ultimate level of engagement that's going to really drive change in communities, right? We've talked about outreach. That's just going out and having a presence so people know what's possibly happening. Now we're talking about engagement, right? That's giving people the opportunity to interact, to say what they think about what's happening. And then that leads to involvement, right? Join this committee, help us to review this, right? Ultimately leading to ownership, a sense of responsibility that's going to go beyond this project, right? And if we think about only the project, we're going to create the conditions which we see today, where there's low trust of our institutions, low cooperation, and ultimately no innovation. So these are some simple reasons to engage, and I'm going to keep the conversation going, passing it over to Liz.
Thanks, Johan. And that was actually a really beautiful segue. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what does that meaningful engagement look like. And I think this topic is really the whole presentation. I'll kind of kick it off, and then I'll be followed by Benita and Mary Moore that dig into some of these other strategies a bit more. Kind of going back to what Johan was just discussing and thinking about all the different types of participation that you often see in public processes, kind of at the far left end, is just informing. So we have a lot of public processes where the intent is to educate or provide information to the public, but it's not really intended to engage with the public. It's not intended to take feedback from the public. As you start to move to the right, that power from the institutions or the entities that are spearheading a project starts to shift. So as you kind of move to the right with consult, thinking about how do we begin to move towards engagement? How do we begin to move towards more of a dialogue with the community and allowing the community to have an influence on the planning process or capital projects or, you know, any institutional process that is happening that will impact them as a community? I think those first two, inform and consult, and then a little bit of involvement, that's often the type of engagement that we see, whether it's through planning and zoning board reviews, site plan reviews, kind of more traditional public meetings, all focus on informing, coming with information, presenting it to the public, saying, this is what we're doing. We'll take your Q&A. Maybe we'll take it into account. Maybe we won't. As you move towards kind of consulting, evolving, consult and involve, that really begins to work a little bit more directly with the public, begin to engage throughout the design or planning process. And that's maybe processes that you'd kind of see that applied in maybe comprehensive plans, small area neighborhood plans, transportation corridor plans, waterfront projects, some capital projects. But again, as you get far to the right of the spectrum, we're not seeing a lot of engagement that kind of delegates or shifts power to the local community who's being the most impacted by some of these decisions or these planning processes. So a majority of our presentation and what we're going to focus on today is really what is meaningful engagement. And that really focuses on kind of the middle to the right end of the spectrum. So shifting that power back to the community, making sure that they have the opportunity from the very beginning and are involved and engaged throughout the process, and that they play a role in the decision making, that they're able to shape the process, the project, and ultimately allowing them to shape their destiny. So as Johan mentioned, one of the just critical pieces, whether you're kind of at the left end of that spectrum or you're really just focusing on informing the public, all the way to shifting power and really engaging with the public, listening is just critical. When you're an institution or an entity that's coming into a community with a project, with a planning process, it's really important that we step back and just actively listen, that we see the project and the process from the community's perspective. It will help us understand what they value, why there may be a level of potentially distrust in any process, and also help us understand their histories, all of their histories, their stories, the community's histories and stories are really going to shape their perceptions and their perceptions of the project. So one, coming to all projects with empathy, the ability to listen, and then I think really critical is demonstrating that we are listening by starting to integrate those stories that we hear from the community and their feedback and their recommendations directly into the design process and the recommendations that are taking shape. I think another critical piece is that, and the, some of the experiences that I've had is a lot of engagement's different every time, and it all depends on the community. So as you're coming in to work with a community, being able to be open to learning and to adapting your process. An engagement strategy that works well with one neighborhood isn't going to necessarily work well with another. So again, I think, and I'll kind of keep coming back to this theme, but engaging really early and often is very important to making sure that engagement is meaningful, and that you start to build those really critical relationships with the community to ensure that they're able to fully participate and take ownership of a project. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples and use a few project examples in terms of the way that we approach engagement and try to approach engagement in all of our projects. So one critical strategy, just being meet people where they are. If you think about traditional public meetings, that's usually an evening meeting at 7 p.m., 2 hours long. You're inviting people to come and listen about where you are in a project, what it is that you're trying to achieve. People that come to those meetings may be coming because they have a direct connection to that project, but it's often not very accessible to people that work a second job, that have families, that just have other things going on in their lives. So if that is the only form of engagement, that's really focused on just informing and isn't representative of meaningful engagement. Meeting people where they are, that is something that you would tailor directly to the community. So often we use what we call pop-ups. Those being, you go to where people are hanging out and you engage people in their space where they are. That makes it convenient so that they can learn about a project, provide feedback on a project or a planning process in their own space on their terms. And then also making sure that all of those events are accessible. So accessible in maybe the typical sense of the word, making sure that anyone with any ability is able to attend, but thinking about languages, what languages are spoken in a community? Are you translating materials to Spanish or other languages to ensure that people can learn about the project that are interested? Literacy is also important. So if you're creating a survey, can everyone truly respond to that survey, or do you need to adapt how you disseminate a survey or gather feedback from a community? A couple examples of where and kind of what's shown on the right of that screen, meeting people where they are takes a level of understanding of a community and where people are hanging out. So if you're in an area where there's high transit ridership, a bus stop might be a great place to have information posted to set up a table where you can provide information to the community as they're waiting for the bus. In the top right photo, in some more rural communities, convenience stores, Stewart's are very popular destinations. We were there at 2 o'clock when the factories let out and school let out, and we're able to catch a lot of people that were not going to come to the public meeting later that night. In the top left, that's a skate park. So again, thinking about where people are congregating and people are hanging out and making sure that those are the hangouts for the local community, for the people that are going to be most impacted by the project or planning process. And then really making sure that those materials that you're presenting, whether it's a survey, a handout, boards where you're asking for input, that they're designed in terms that are really relatable and easily understood. I know there's probably a lot of people on this call that are doing very technical work, but that needs to be translated through a filter so that everyone can understand what it is that the project is and what is trying to be achieved. Engagement should really be community inspired. So again, understanding the physical context of the community within which you're working. I can't underscore the importance of just walking a neighborhood right when you start a project, especially if it's a place that you're not familiar with, knowing the street names, knowing the corner stores, knowing, again, those hangout spots is going to enable conversations with community members, enable you to not be presented as much as an outsider, but to have those really productive conversations. In the bottom right, when we were out in Hartford doing a small area plan, through the planning process, we built relationships with local musicians, local artists, and ended up at that skate park pop-up and having a local musician come and DJ the whole event. So we compensated him. He brought in 8 different artists. We had DJs, we had the Hartford Youth Drum Band, and several other musicians and performers that were out there with us all Saturday, just kind of like a small scale block party as part of the engagement process for that event. And then really using those events to not only be community led, community driven, but also enabling them to really celebrate the local culture. And then building trust. So I think all of these kind of build up to engagement opportunities that help to start building trust. I'm not going to talk too much about community liaisons. We're going to talk about that a little bit further on in the presentation, but making sure that your engagement is investing in the community again throughout. So a couple examples, and I am also speaking as a consultant that's coming in with a set budget. So we often try to make sure that what we're spending funds on, whether it's at a venue, food for an event, printing for a project, we're doing that as much as possible in the local community. So again, in Hartford, we were lucky. We had a bunch of different local food vendors. We had local print shops. We spent probably $5,000 right in the local community to help us with that project. Another important piece is just small successes and kind of small engagement throughout. So again, starting really early on, working with the community, help connecting them to resources, understanding their true needs, and again, being really adaptable throughout the process. So understanding what works and building on those relationships. And then ultimately making sure that, and to Johan's point too, as you're building trust, to really build trust, it has to be beyond just one project. We can't really parachute in, engage with the community for a project and leave hands off. That really needs to be a long-term relationship that begins to be built with the community, with the municipality, with the institution or government entity to really ensure that that trust is there, that relationship is strong and is a relationship that grows over time and is not just a one-time thing for one particular project. And with that, I'm going to pass it off on the relationship building point to Benita.
Good afternoon. So I've always worked in communities where I don't have a relationship. I've worked all over New York State in rural and urban communities, and I don't live there. Maybe some of the farming communities, I really didn't have a sense of what's important to them or who's who there. I didn't know the history. I didn't know the landscape. I didn't know how people moved around. And then I worked for cash for programs. So I had to find a way to get into those communities, develop relationships, do what my mission was, whatever project we had going on at the time, and learn how to maintain those relationships. Because just because I came in there for one project today, months or years later, I might have to come back into that community. And the one thing I learned was, as Liz mentioned, parachuting. A lot of these communities would tell me stories about how we only see you guys when you want something, when you have a project, when you have a survey, when you have something, and then we don't see you anymore, or we don't get the data back, or we don't see what's going to come of us participating in whatever you have. So they feel exploited. And so I've learned how to maintain these relationships and good feelings, and also feel like I'm a part of the community, and the community makes me feel like I've contributed something that they really wanted. Next slide. So one of the ways I get into the community is I do research. Before I even leave my office, I go online and I try to learn about what are the prominent organizations in the community, who are the prominent people. I look for certain names of certain people popping up regularly in the local newspapers, in e-news. When I talk to people in organizations, or I look on their websites and I see certain faces popping up regularly in different community events or being highlighted, then I know maybe I need to try to check in with that person and get to know them and get them to let me understand more, help me understand more about this community. See if any person I worked for the state health department. So we have contracts all over the state with all kinds of programs. So I would go to some of my coworkers and say, do you have any projects in this community? Who do you talk to? Who, what kinds of things are you learning about this community? What kinds of projects have you done? What's your relationship like in this community? Is there anyone you think I should be talking to? So this way, I don't have to reinvent the wheel sometimes, because we've already got, we may have a really strong relationship or in a community, and this person knows the right people and they may introduce me. And then that's where I start to step in that community and start to, let them understand who I am, what I'm doing, what kinds of things I hope will benefit their community. I attend community gatherings. I will pop up at community gatherings just to hear what some of the issues are. So you can learn about a lot of the community gatherings on Facebook and some of the other places they post their meetings. Next slide. Oh, well, actually, and go back, I'm sorry. Also, you have food banks, Meals on Wheels, that, so look at different organizations that target certain kinds of certain kinds of populations. Boys and Girls Club for kids, active organizations where people are active. So if you're trying to do a health program, what are some of the organizations that may exist? Where's the community center? Barbershops, hair salon, bowling alleys, outdoor clubs. Look to find those kinds of organizations. Who do people in that community trust? Who do they confide in? Where do they congregate? So those are some of the things I try to learn before I go into the community, and then when I get into the community, actually engaging with the people that the community is engaging with. Next. So it's really important that we hire local leaders and community members. They trust these people, they see them all the time. I've been told, going into a community, I never see you in our church. I never see you here or there. So, a lot of times people really resent the fact that you don't live in their community. And so, and the other thing is, when you hire local leaders, I mean, you're entrusting them to carry out whatever it is that you need to have done there. And that they're the ones that people trust. They won't necessarily trust you because you're not there. You don't live there. You don't see the things that they go through day to day. Partner with local entities that are receptive to your efforts. So if I'm doing a health event, there are lots of health insurance programs. There are outdoor organizations. I will work. There may be farm groups that know the community and have certain things going on that tie in with what I'm doing. Ensure that they play a role in crafting your recommendations and decision making. Give them access to everything that you're doing within your constraints. Next. So some of the things that I've done were to go and learn about what are the local festivals and community events and meetings. In Albany, we have the Empire State Summer Music Festival, and that draws a lot of people from all over the city just to see different artists that pop up. So I might go talk to the festival people and say, can we set up a table? Can we participate in Rochester? There's New York City, actually. There's a Puerto Rican Day Festival and parade. If I want to reach the Latino community, I may want to work with them. And if I had money, I would see if there's anything I could sponsor. But the other thing is, I've always worked for cash poor organizations. So sometimes I'll partner with organizations that have resources that I don't have. So they may have t-shirts, they may have lip gloss, they may have things to give away that will draw people over to our table. I've helped create coalitions. So there may be 4 or 5 or more organizations. We're all trying to reach the same population. Our missions are somewhat similar. So what we'll do is pull together a coalition. And we used to have these pop-up table sessions right in the community. We'd all show up on a particular corner once a week. And we would bring food, we'd bring a barbecue grill, we'd have healthy snacks and grill chicken burgers and chicken franks. And that would draw people to us. And then you'd have someone who is from the AIDS Institute, providing AIDS information, from the hospital talking about the resources they have, an insurance program saying how you can enroll in health insurance, a domestic violence program. So we'd all have tables sit on a corner in a particular community. And that was a coalition. We'd come together every month and we would get the local grocery store to provide food, the food that we were barbecuing. We'd get the local housing authority to give us the barbecue grill and actually drop it off where we were at to do this. So we found ways to do things that didn't cost a lot of money. We partnered with existing organizations and events. You know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If a church is doing a festival regularly, you know, annually, see if you can somehow or another plug into that that local event that happens every year. Why do you have to pull together all those resources when all you have to do is ask them, can I have a table at your festival that you've been doing every year for years? Utilize communication outlets. You can, many of the community organizations, they may have a newsletter, they may have social media, Facebook page, website, provide utility bills or announcements, a newsletter, even a mail out newsletter. Say, can I put my link on your website? Can I put an article in your magazine or your newsletter? I mean, and usually they don't charge you anything for this. So this is another way of getting the information out. You ask them, how do you communicate with your constituents? Can I go through you to provide my message to your constituents? And this really helps you get what you're achieve what you're trying to do. And it also enhances their role. I've gone into community-based organizations that really want to try to serve as many needs of the community as possible. So you're coming in doing something that they may not have the resources to do, and you're helping them further serve their community. So next one. Oh.
Hi, thank you. You guys are a hard act to follow. So I'm Mary Moore. And I wanted to talk about community engagement because a lot of, you know, if you want to get it right, it really does take a lot of time and a lot of just creative thinking. And there are things that can make it easier, but a lot of times it's the thing that's probably the most underfunded on a project. The more a community has been disinvested in, and for the longer, the more difficult it is to connect with people in a meaningful way where they feel like their time is well spent, they're being heard, their voice is going to make a difference. And so how do you do that when the budget is scarce? And so I'm going to go through a few different examples, and some of these will be similar to other topics that people have spoken about, but just hitting again on how those can be cost-effective ways of connecting with people and the value there. So I'm going to start by just saying that the best thing to do is really acknowledge that engagement is time-consuming and is, you know, one of the most, if not the most important part of the project. And so really thinking about if you're in the position of awarding grants for projects, or you're submitting grants and describing, you know, what the components of the project need to be, really acknowledging the effort that needs to be put into the engagement in order for it to resonate with the community, and trying to build that in as much as you can from the beginning of the project. And then as some other folks have mentioned today, really thinking about compensating community members. I mean, you've got professionals who may be making, you know, $100 an hour or more to be there. The community member shouldn't be asked to do all of that just for free. And so investing, you know, by, you know, buying food from local restaurants and businesses, compensating local leaders for their time in assisting with the project, and recognizing that what they're bringing to the table is as valuable, if not more valuable than everything else, is really important. And it goes a long way with building trust and lasting relationships in a community. And so as you've heard from several people, just really building that coalition of partners. And a lot of times you'll have a project where there'll be a study advisory committee that gets identified from the beginning. And ideally we want 10 or 12 people. And I don't believe in that model at all. I think you're going to build more and more meaningful relationships as the project continues. And you need to leave that door open to add people on. If somebody's really excited and they're going to show up, they should be on the study advisory committee. And so these were all people, Johan and I worked on the Craig Main connection together. And these were people who just kept showing up and they were super excited and they were just wonderful ambassadors for the project. And the relationships that they had really helped carry the message out to others. And it really, these were people who got excited about the project and who have continued to be champions of this project from when the initial feasibility study was done. And so really recognizing their voice, their expertise, the energy they can bring and the connections they can bring to the project. Just as an example, so the person you see on the top is Will Rivas, who's a wonderful community leader here in Schenectady and is involved in countless different organizations, and in particular works with young folks. And Johan was the neighborhood liaison for the project. And he came up to me, Johan had reached out to him to come to one of our curbside conversations, and he stopped by and he said, well, I don't really know you, but Johan says I should talk to you. So I'm here to listen. And so having that neighborhood connection is really important. And just listening to Will and the two of us talking, we became really good friends throughout the project. And he was the person who really propelled it to the next step. And so I'll talk about that a little more in a minute, but really thinking about, including and growing that body of decision makers with anyone who's there, who wants to put in the time and be part of that project. So again, letting those local leaders, how can you let them be the face of the project? So it's not just you talking all the time. One of the things we did was we invited local leaders to facilitate certain discussions where maybe it was focused on a specific topic or talking about, specific concepts or next steps or why it's important to be involved. And so really like giving them the voice and the opportunity to be the face of the project and creating those and also I wanted to mention just creating opportunities for those people to meet one another. So one of the things that was interesting about this project was there were so many wonderful stakeholders and organizations in the area, but they didn't all necessarily know what the other organizations were doing. And so we really created opportunities for them to get to know each other, and the community gets to become stronger because of the relationships they're building during the process as well. So not just thinking about your own relationships, but how can you facilitate other relationships? And sometimes you'll have somebody who will come in and they'll say, well, I'm looking to do this in the community. And 2 months later, you might hear somebody else who's like doing something. And so you connect those two people. And so thinking about just really listening and, not just how people in the community can help you with this project, but how you can help them with their vision for the community. And so, again, like working with young people, I mean, I'm more than happy to say that any young person I've worked with has had a much higher cool factor than I have. And so having that energy, that enthusiasm, people from the neighborhood who can walk around, it really like gets people excited and they listen. And it's probably a lot of people who might not, have the interest or consider, and these are the kids who are going to inherit this community. So empowering them to really, take the lead in this so they want to be involved in the future and they can see that what they have to say and what they're doing really makes a difference is a really wonderful tool. So the image you see in the top left was a group from Working Group on Girls. And it just happened to be a really lucky coincidence. There'd been an article in the paper about a project I had worked on, and they reached out and said, would you be willing to do a one-day workshop for our kids? And I said, absolutely. Could we, tie it into this project? And so we walked around and looked at streetscapes all over and talked about what felt good in one place and what didn't and what a complete street project is. And then we went back and collaged about different ideas. We worked with a local not-for-profit to help us do an art project about how the neighborhood could look different. And they created artwork that was later displayed during one of the public events for the project. And then I ended up hiring them to help walk around and do some surveys in the neighborhood and to be ambassadors and greet people as they were coming to some of the events. And so really thinking about how you can value their time and really empower them to take the lead in their community. And So the other one is just be resourceful. I mean, a lot of times with a tight budget, you just got to be creative. And so this project, the Craig Main Connection that Johan and I worked on, was one of the first where I was really sort of learning about the, how to really engage a community that's been disinvested in for a long time in a meaningful way. And so one of the things we did was I went to one of the local foundations and we talked them into giving us $1,000 to help support this event that we wanted to do. And we were able to buy local food. We were able to hire some young people to help get the word out. We reached out to the Hamilton Hill Art Center, and they came with a bunch of their young dancers who all then came with their families. So if you can do events where, and one of the things we did about this was, nobody who wants to come to the public meeting. And this neighborhood had already had a ton of meetings as part of another study, and there was a lot of meeting fatigue. So we said, okay, we're not doing a meeting, we're doing a party. And we branded it as the launch party. And so we had a DJ, we had dancers, and then we had raffles. And I asked the kids, I was like, what kind of raffles would you want? And they're like, oh, just like $10 for Subway or $15 for Nike or whatever. And so we came up with some just really simple raffles. And then you got a raffle ticket for every station that you went to give your feedback on the design concepts. And so it was a great cost-effective way to, people were running all over the room to participate in the different stations. And so just thinking about ways to make things exciting and also to offer some kind of reward for participation. So whether it's free ice cream or the local DJ or a few raffles, those can all be sort of great ways to value people's time and increase participation. And then again, as been mentioned before, it really doesn't cost anything to just set up a couple tables and have your graphics handy. So if you can go to a park where people are going to be, all that day, or be on the sidewalk or next to the bus station, those are some of the, best places to get the input directly from the people that the project is going to impact. And it again, just really helps get the word out in the community so that they know this is happening. It doesn't just drop out of outer space. People have heard about it. They're, aware that the project that, people have been in the community. And so that's another really effective. And it's also, a lot of times I think we did this in 4 or 5 places. We did a ton of different public meetings. I don't think we ever had the same person twice. And so it was just another great way to catch people who you might not otherwise catch. And people were just really excited to see, positive things happening. So I think that's a really, really valuable tool. And you can make these really fun. I had been to a presentation where a guy had presented this wonderful idea where we borrowed some funky furniture from the local Habitat Restore, and we just set up a carpet and some couches and some game chairs on the corner. And some people who may not walk over to the table because that's not their thing. A lot of people are going to go, what the heck is going on over there? And it just is a great way to kind of spark a conversation. Who are the people hanging out on the couches by the sidewalk? So you can make it, kind of like a fun little pop-up event that'll draw, attention to it, and people will be curious and come over and engage with you. So. And I think there's one more. And so then I wanted to make the point, look for those opportunities for the project to start with the community. So a lot of times in planning projects, you might do the, study, and that could even take a year. And then it could take a whole another year or more to go get the funding from the state or the federal government. And then it could take another year for it to go out and have the design done. And then it would be another year before the construction actually happens. And that is a lot of time for people to think the project is going away or it was a waste of their time. And so having websites, sending out updates, doing the projects in between and keeping the engagement. So you don't just engage at the beginning, when that project's going under construction, you work with the neighborhood liaison so they can say, hey, guess what? This is going to start in 3 months and you're going to see this and just keeping that momentum and the message out there. And a huge way to do that is through those partnerships with the community. And so with this one, the gentleman I spoke of before, Will Rivas, we had heard actually when we did our little couch pop-up, some kids said, you know what, we all thought the bridge was scary because the car's on the top. And they're like, no, it's the interstate below, and it's because the bridge is so high. And so that really inspired this idea of doing banners on the bridge so that you wouldn't be looking directly off the edge of the bridge. And so we got a grant, and we we worked with a whole bunch of local artists, and we paired local artists with youth organizations to each do a different workshop so they could put their sort of vision for the future along this corridor on a piece of artwork that then got displayed on the bridge. And then we shut down the bridge and had a big block party. And so just really thinking about, being there when that neighborhood leader decides to take it to the next step, and supporting them and connecting them with the resources to make that happen. And then the last thing I wanted to say is how important it is to just be prepared for trial and error. I mean, when you're working in a community that's been disinvested in for a long time, trees are going to get broken, like things are going to happen. Things might get vandalized. That doesn't mean the neighborhood hates it. It means there's one person who's in pain. And so the majority of people, they like the progress, they like seeing it, and you've got to stick with it. You've got to go back and plant that tree again and talk to more people and talk to people in the community about why this is ours and why it's worth sticking with it. And because nothing's ever going to happen if we just say, oh, one thing went wrong, we're not going to try anything over there again. And so really recognizing that and figuring out, okay, well, this didn't work. How can we think through how to do this in a different way? So that's more difficult, that happening is more difficult, or and just continuing that conversation, acknowledging and really thinking about programming. It's great to put physical improvements in a place, but if you don't think about programming and people don't have constructive ways to spend their time, then that's a real problem too. So again, just really connecting with the community and supporting that community as much as you can is going to be the best chance of a successful project that lasts long into the future.
Great. Well, thank you for a great and informative presentation. I think my takeaways from this presentation is reminded of a quote from FDR is do something. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, do something else. I think that's a lesson for engagement. And then also being in this season of rebirth and resurrection, something that Jesus said, blessed are the engagement makers, for they shall become children of God. And engagement and revitalizing communities is an action of rebirth and revitalization and reincarnation. So let us celebrate the start of that by meaningful public engagement. So we'll open it up to questions, and we have a couple in the Q&A box already. So I'll just encourage our speakers to take a look at that.
Well, see, so one question was, how do you establish and maintain engagement when the community is not so enthusiastic about the subject project, and strategies for dealing with that situation?
I'll start, I guess, because I touched on it a little bit in the beginning. And it's really about the reframe. What is the right problem, right? Is it park improvement, or is it supporting the community and chilling out to cool off, to heat up? What are you really solving for? Because a lot of the times we think we have the problem and we don't. So you have to find the right problem to solve. And sometimes it's a reframe of the project. Maybe it's really cut and dry. We're going to build a bridge, but ultimately, what are you solving for? Do you think you know the right problem? And how are you validating that? How are you testing your assumptions and reframing that project within the context of the people's lives who you're looking to impact? So pass it on.
I think I usually find partners that our work is mutually beneficial, that they're doing things already that kind of relate with what I'm doing, or what we're doing may enhance what they're doing. Because yeah, I could see, coming from a health perspective, we've gone into communities where, COVID, I mean, how do you convince people that they need to have this shot? How do you convince people some of the things that we've done in the health department have been quite controversial when HIV and AIDS happened. How do you let people know that this is something that's really important that we need to address? And so your education is important, but the most important thing is actually finding the right people in the community that the community trusts, and educating them, and then finding that common area where it's mutually beneficial for you and that partner to work together to address the needs that the concerns that the people really have about the project you're bringing in. In the Black community, from a health perspective, there's a lot of mistrust. So if you're coming in with a construction project or rerouting water or any number of other things, why should I trust you? But if you're able to educate the right people and you're able to bring them in so that they can start to bring along people in the community and educate them, hopefully, and explain how it's mutually beneficial. Hopefully that will help build the trust that you can go on and do your project.
I think also along those same lines, just really listening, asking questions of them that show that you understand that they're not, happy or satisfied with the project, and really trying to get to the root of that. So, just saying, tell me more about, like, what are your concerns about this? How can I help address these questions, and really just making sure that you aren't automatically assuming they don't like it because of A, B, or C, or that you're just there to kind of like sell the project, but really listening and thinking about, whether the project can be altered slightly, or if there's a way to accommodate some of those questions, or connect them with someone who can better assure them that their concerns are, have been heard, but that's not going to be an issue on this problem. So really just thinking about, listening, understanding, and then pivoting as you need to from that point.
Just to take the liberty to communicate my experience, and a lot of the disconnect between community needs and project development lies within the terms of the grant contract. So if you are a community activist and you want to do something, you have to write a grant. So to a certain extent, the cake has to be baked before you submit it to the state. And therein lies the challenge of informing the community of what you're doing rather than engaging the community in project development. That being said, I think we're seeing some better latitude in grant budgets, including more allocations for community engagement. And also, getting the grant is one thing, but you can also work with the granting organization to rescope your project. So once you get the grant, great, but it's not, things don't need to be set in stone at that point. You can always go back and work with your granting agency to reconceptualize your project to fit the community better.
The other thing is we often don't know the history of that population or that community, what's gone on in that community over time that have placed those people in that to approach you in such a way, or the history. I know we have a lot of more recent immigrants that have come to our area that don't know the history of this area, let's say from a contaminant perspective, or just even from a violence perspective, or so. I mean, I think just understanding where people are coming from. Let's say you have a refugee coming from a community with a lot of violence, and yet you're trying to get into that community and do certain things, but they may have come from a country where there's a lot of turmoil. So just trying to understand where they're coming from and what their history is that's when you're engaging with their community leaders and really trying to, get them, understand what's going on there.
And then there was one more question about how do you apply some of these strategies to a whole city or region. And I think some of what Benita was talking about in terms of identifying key partners that are serving that whole city or maybe that region. I think when you start to get beyond a city and you're looking at a county or a region, making sure that you're connecting with those municipal leaders of each local municipality and kind of tapping into their networks and communication networks is really important. But then I think also Mary's neighborhood liaison approach, if you're thinking about a whole city, you still have all of these neighborhoods that comprise that city. So if you could have, having the neighborhood associations that are already existing entities, engaging with them, having neighborhood liaisons that help you get a nuanced understanding of the community too. Anybody else?
One of the things that I would do is look at the agencies that actually serve, let's say, a whole county, like the Catholic Charities, the Community Action Agency for that county. I would try to get to know them and ask them how they're approaching their community. But the other thing is, even once you get in there and you establish relationships, one thing I did not bring up was maintaining contact. So I've found ways to just stay in contact with the communities I've developed relationships with. If I've gone in there this year, and I may not go back into that community because I used to work for the entire state. I wandered around the entire state. So I might be in Binghamton or Tioga County serving the county, and they may not see me for years until I go into another program. And so what I would do is the ones that I had relationships with, I would send them information about grants, because I would create a database about that organization when I had a relationship, when I established a relationship, and I'd look at what their mission was, who their constituents were, and then if they're serving, doing domestic violence or reentry or nutrition programs, if I saw a grant, and I often looked for things that I whether it dealt with what I was doing or not. If I knew that organization served reentry, prison reentry people or domestic violence, if I saw a grant, it was a community garden, I'd send it to them. If the health department had an announcement about, there's an outbreak somewhere, anything that I thought tied in with what their day-to-day was, I'd send it throughout the year. And so this way, when I finally come in 2 years later and they haven't seen me since the last time I had a project, they've at least seen emails about information, news items. And I would actually access, I was on mail lists for the Department of Environmental Conservation, for the New York State Parks. So when Parks was hiring kids, and I know this organization serves kids and these kids are looking for jobs, I would send them the information that Parks and the Department of Environmental Conservation have camps, they have jobs. I would send it to that community action, that community organization, so that when I finally came in and I had to do focus groups or any other kind of program, they didn't say, why are you here? We only see you when you want some. So, I mean, that's the other thing, maintaining contact and building a network.
I think another thing that we didn't touch a whole lot on because we were focusing more on sort of the deeper dive community engagement. But I think in terms of if you're thinking about a region or a city, thinking about the roles of people who are on planning commissions, on zoning boards, sitting in there, a lot of times, so if it's, so that typically you're reviewing private projects. So it's very different from a state or federal or municipally funded project. And the engagement tends to be a lot more limited. But you as a planning board, you might be their first, their doorway into the city. Like it's our job to be welcoming and kind and supportive and making sure that anything you can do to help make it easier for someone to speak and feel comfortable to speak, and sometimes that includes limiting how some people speak in the room so that everyone there feels comfortable, but being willing to make sure that it's a welcoming place for everyone, being that connector. So you've got somebody who comes and they've got fairly limited resources and they're trying to start a new local business and they need to put in that street tree. Can you connect them with, someone from the city or somebody from a not-for-profit organization that might help them be able to do that? And having, letting them know that if they have questions or they need to make changes, that city staff is available and encouraging them to go, if that staff person's really, patient and good with people, that they can go in and answer those questions, and just helping to give people whatever tools you can to help them get where they need to go and to show that they're appreciated and being heard and respected. So I think, even in those smaller encounters where there's not as much opportunity, you can you can help build in some of those connections, and that overall can help build that trust with a neighborhood when they, recognize that they're appreciated being there, and that you're trying to help them get where they're going.
Looks like one more question rolled in about the Patroon Creek Greenway and how that engagement process could be replicated on a tight budget. Not sure what you mean by tight, but hopefully you have a little bit of funds. But I think, 3 of us here worked on the Patroon Creek Greenway. That's how I met Benita. Benita was one of our community liaisons. We also worked with Salah Harris, who was a University of Albany student, as our other community liaison. And Benita and Salah were amazing. I think that was key to a lot of the engagement strategy for that project. There was a lot of on the ground kind of business drop-ins. Salah led a lot with university students. We created a lot of materials in-house that we provided to our community liaisons. But a lot of that was kind of to Mary Moore's point, replicated engagement. So we would do one thing, but then move it to another station and move it to another. So once you create the materials, it's just a matter of duplicating them and bringing them to different spots, different populations, different communities to gather the same feedback. And that one also used a lot of pop-up events. So we were at the Empire State Plaza Farmers Market is a great place to be. I mean, they're super easy to work with. They set up the tent for you. It's like unbeatable. And we were at bus stops. We work with CDTA to get a lot of flyers in bus shelters. So again, pretty low budget things, but we dispersed it and did a lot of replication of materials so that we could get, broaden that outreach as much as possible. But we're happy to connect after this if you want to talk more about your project.
And local libraries are great. And a lot of times the librarians and people who work at the desk there know the community really well. And a lot of people, are going in and out of the library. And if you can do that and have a good librarian that will sort of pull people off the street and out of the library, and help let them know what's going on and connect you, that can be another really great venue that, again, it's, just a matter of setting up some tables and coordinating with that library. And usually, there's no charge for the space. And back to this space, one tiny point I meant to mention was, a lot of times community organizations will give you their space for free, which is great if you're on a very tight budget. But if you can build it into your budget, even if you're just paying them $50 to use that space, that means a lot for their organization. And it means a lot that you're also appreciating that they're contributing something to the project. So really thinking about, not just compensating people for their time, but if you can also compensate local organizations for the venue, that's another way to help build that trust and relationship with the community.
And we had a sign-in sheet for volunteers or people who really wanted to share our message. And so people would sign in, and there was a guy from who was really good with video, and he took all of our materials and created something that he shared with parents in the school that he worked with. He created a media presentation. We had people from, bicycle coalitions who really cared about what we were doing. And so they were extensions of us. So we were like, once you hit the right people and people who were passionate about what we were trying to do, it was like branches of a tree going out, and that's how the message got out. Hitting the right people, I guess. When we started to do those community events, they stepped forward and said, we want to see this message spread further.
So you don't always need to do fundraising, you need to do friend raising instead. So I'd just like to thank all of our speakers, Benita, Liz, Mary, and Johan, for a great presentation. And those of us joining online, please hang around for next week's presentation, or join us again next week, I should say, for Hot Topics and Comprehensive Plans for Small Towns. We'll be joined by Nan Stolzenberg to give the presentation. So thanks again, and hope everyone has a great holiday week.
Thanks for having us, Mark. Thanks, everyone.